Okay, I think we're live, John.
Excellent.
All right. So let's see. We just let's see, 3 minutes to go till we start. So we don't have anyone. Okay, a couple people are starting to come into the room now. If you can
Cool.
hear us, all right. If you all don't mind chatting something in the
Yeah,
window
absolutely.
there, we'll be able to
What's going
hear
on,
that.
everybody? Let's see. I wonder if I'm able to see. Get it
Got
up.
11 people here now. So somebody, if you can hear us and all the audio sounds good, chat something in the.
I want to make sure.
All right, Mark is here. Mark, can you hear us? Okay, Robert. Here we go. Okay, great. Yeah. So I'm broadcasting from here in Florida. John is out in snowy Colorado. I think, John, you told me you were driving home from Colorado Springs yesterday and there was snow
Jump,
all over the road, and
jumping.
and it was 80 degrees here today and the sun was shining. It was beautiful, but
You're gonna
so
just
we're gonna.
you're gonna freeze, man, when you come out here in a couple weeks.
I know. Well, I have to go to Vegas before that in the first part of December, and I heard it was, 40 last night in Vegas. It was like 44 or something like that. So
Oh my God.
even that is something us Floridians are not really used to. So I'll
Wow.
get that. Vegas will get me kind of ready for Denver. That'll be a precursor to that. If I survive Vegas in a couple weeks, I'll see you in Denver near the end of the month.
There you go. There you go.
So thank you all for coming. I see we got Krista here, Rick, Dennis, Robert, Cecil. Thank you all for coming out tonight. We got 37 people online so far, and hopefully
Oh,
more
baby.
on their way.
Screw it.
So
Let's all just get in let's hop online and play a poker tournament together. We've got enough
you know
people.
what? Let's get.
We've got enough people. We should just get a game started.
I agree. Yeah, let's skip this webinar anyway. Let's start up a game of PLO. I mean, what better way to learn than just right into the fire, huh?
That was actually my whole plan. That's what you actually told me was going to happen. We were rounding up like, hey, John, I've got all these brand new PLO players. They're coming online and they all want to play you. I thought that's what we were doing here.
I am going to tell everyone at the start here that we do have at the end of this webinar, we have an offer that John is going to make on one of his courses that he has never offered it before at this price. I mean, I had to, I really got a deal for you all that John has, he's rethought it several times. He's like, are you sure, Steve? And his marketing guy got after me for offering his course this low. So really be sure you stick around until after John's webinar, because he's really got a deal for you that he's never, I don't believe, ever given out before to anyone on one of his courses. So,
Sure.
Okay, so I think we're getting close to 8 o'clock here. What do you think, John? You want to? You think you're about ready to get started, or maybe we should give people a couple minutes here to?
Why don't we give people a couple minutes, and then you
All
can
right.
you can do the ceremonial shuffle up and deal, and then we can.
All right. All right. Rick is saying you're getting echo. Is anyone else getting echo, or is that just Rick? If someone doesn't mind chatting and letting us know if you're getting a lot of echo or not.
I've got headphones that should fix it, but let me turn them down. Maybe that's it. I don't have an echo, but I'm happy to troubleshoot.
Okay, some people are saying now it sounds fine to them. So, so Rick, I don't know what to say. It may just be feedback from your own system. Got at least one person saying it sounds fine. Jason asked the question, will there be a replay? And yes, we will have a replay available, and we will send that out to you after the webinar is finished here. Several other people saying it sounds great here, loud and clear. You guys are clear now, so I think we're in good shape. If you're having some echo, it maybe you just need to turn down your the volume on your laptop speakers or whatever you're using a little bit. So okay. All right. Well, I guess it is. It's 8:01 here. Why don't we? I guess we'll get started. And it looks like we got a pretty good crowd, and hopefully a lot of other people are on their way still. So I want to introduce everyone to John Beauprez here. John has been in the PLO world for a long time now, coming from a Hold'em background, but he's known as one of the leading experts and top coaches in Pot Limit Omaha. We're hoping in advance that most of you at least know the rules of Pot Limit Omaha. He's not going to go over the rules as far as that you have to play 2 out of your 4 cards and what makes a pot limit game versus a no limit game. So hopefully you all at least have that much of a background. But other than that, he will be going over some pretty basic PLO strategy, I believe. So I think with that, I will turn it over to John here, and John's going to talk for about an hour, and then after that, we're going to have a Q&A session with him. So be sure to stick around for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Excellent. Well, first of all, here, let me pull up my screen here. And I got a presentation here for you guys. Okay. So first of all, I want to say today is meant to be extremely educational and open. I'm happy to answer, as Steve mentioned, anything at the end of our presentation here. And actually, I want to thank Steve for allowing me to talk PLO with you guys. You know, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, there's nothing that I love doing more than connecting with passionate PLO players, talking about PLO, helping people win more money playing PLO. And today, this presentation, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what I've learned from teaching more than 1,000 PLO players. And then I'm going to give you the exact framework I used to take these players from grinding the micros to winning at mid stakes and beyond. So Steve brushed a little on who I am and where I've been, but let's expand a little bit on this. So my name is John Beauprez. I am the founder and lead instructor of PLOquickpro.com. You can see that patch right there on my chest in the WSOP picture there. I'm the go-to expert for teaching players how to master the fundamentals, increase their win rate, and move up in stakes fast. I'm known as the PLO PhD. I'm the advisor to WSOP and WCOOP champions and mid to high stakes pros. I won a bracelet in a No Limit 6 Max tournament. And that's one reason why a lot of players come to me for coaching, is because I've had a lot of experience playing both the 2-card game and the 4-card game. I've had more than 300 pay by the hour students. I've had thousands of customers, people who have purchased my courses. And I've been featured on WSOP live streams for both No Limit and PLO commentary. And I'm also the author of the best-selling book called the PLO Quick Pro Manual, which is available on Amazon, and it's also available on my site. So here's what we're going to learn specifically. This is broken down into 2 parts. The first part is going to be how to streamline your PLO education. One of the biggest complaints or challenges that people have when they come to me and they want to learn PLO is they don't know how to go from point A to point Z. They don't know how to go from 0 to winning money, or maybe they're already playing a lot and they want to become winners for the first time, or they're have some type of break even or meager win rate and they're really looking to crush and move up in stakes. So we're going to go over how to really streamline your PLO education, get the most bang for your buck, or waste the least amount of your time learning PLO. The second is we're going to go over the core concepts to playing PLO profitably. Now, this is going to be a little more technical. This is going to be the same type of lesson that I give to brand new students, and which is also sort of a condensed version of the first module in my course, which is called Win 1K. So why is this important? Well, PLO is growing faster than ever. Hey, if you've played online, if you've been out to the World Series, or if you've kind of tracked tournament stops over the years, PLO is undoubtedly growing like crazy. When I first started playing online, I was playing like 10 cent, 25 cent, or 25 cent, 50 cent. And I remember there being only a couple of tables available. In fact, when I started going out to the World Series in about 2005, I remember there was only a couple PLO tables at basically all the stakes. Like, it was in a little corner of the room. Now, when you go out to the World Series, there's 10 tables at all of the big casinos. So PLO is growing. It's where the action is. If you're one of those people who has kind of strut through the casino and you've seen where all the action is, you've undoubtedly seen some of these whales that are sitting on these piles of chips. I know that it's certainly down there in Florida. Steve's experienced a lot of that. And as he mentioned, some of you all are from Florida as well. So I'm sure you've seen this too. And you want to learn how to get into the action.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
John, can you hear me? I don't know if your PowerPoints are not showing up right now. It seemed like they were up for a minute and they disappeared.
It's on my screen. Let me see if I can fix that.
Okay, now it just came back.
And what about now?
And now it disappeared again.
Well, I'm not sure. It's not there on my screen.
Yeah, I don't know why. I've seen that happen one time before with Webinar Jam. I don't know. Sometimes it's grabbing the wrong. Do you have it set to capture one window?
I had it at full screen, but let me see if I can fix it real quick. I can try again.
Yeah, sometimes you have to tell Webinar Jam which window you're.
Got it. What about now? Let me give it a shot. How's that?
So still, let's see. It still disappeared again. I don't know why. I know we had it working when we tested it earlier today.
I think I know how to fix it. Technology is a beautiful thing. All right, let's give this a shot. I think this is going to work. How about now?
Oh, there you go. Now you got it.
Beautiful. All right, so we're all caught up to the second one. I said, PLO is growing faster than ever. Crowds of players, they want to go pro or they want to supplement their income. This is specifically for no limit players. In fact, the main reason that I got into PLO in the first place was because not only did I think my no limit game was growing a little stale, not really my game, but my passion for the game was getting a little stale. But I frankly just saw a lot of the softest games in the poker rooms were the PLO tables. It was insane. A lot of times these big whales would get stuck playing no limit, and they figured they could get unstuck by playing PLO because there's more action, there's more pots. Maybe they feel it seems less threatening because PLO is perceived to be less of a solved game than no limit. The third is a lot of the training out there. It's fragmented. It's difficult to study. It's downright unreliable. I mean, there's a lot of poker coaching out there nowadays that is conducted by players who aren't proven winners. So it's important to know where your training is coming from, whose mouth is it coming from, and is it actually going to work? The fourth is success or failure compounds over time. The biggest leaks are often the easiest to fix. I tell this to students all the time. You see this. You see this evident in no limit, obviously, and also all variants of poker, where a mistake on an earlier street really compounds on later streets. And I think that is can be extrapolated to also learning habits. And also, if you learn a bad habit early on and you commit that habit over and over and over again, it'll compound over time. So a lot of times, what I tell students or I tell people is, look, the biggest mistakes are usually the easiest to fix. Fold this hand forever, or re-raise this hand forever, or those types of things. So I actually find that the difference between someone being a break even or a solid winner compared to being a losing player isn't as big as you might suspect. So it's important to develop those good habits early on. Is this webinar for you? As I mentioned, if you're currently a micro or low stakes player, this is for you. If you want to be a consistent, mid stakes or greater player, this is for you. If you're constantly working to learn and improve, but you have yet to feel that you're beating any stake, this is for you. If you can see that many players are making huge mistakes, but you don't know how to capitalize on them, this is for you as well. If you're short on time, but you've always wanted to get more serious about improving your PLO game, this is for you. And I also might add, this is going to be a great webinar for live players as well. All right, so a little bit more about my story so that you guys can connect a little deeper about where I'm coming from. So, I started off playing the PLOs at the micros casually. I actually never intended to play poker for a living. I really just love the game. I was content playing $20 sit and goes when I was in college for beer money. But I really got into it. I started watching training videos and I improved it really quickly. But it was not easy for me. It was a huge struggle. And even worse, I really was tilting away whatever money that I was winning. And I felt alone. I mean, I actually remember I had given up poker permanently. I had gotten so upset one night that I remember I was playing full tilt, and the rake back money that I got, I went and I purchased golf clubs, if you can believe it. And what's ironic about that is I think I picked the only thing more tilting than PLO to invest all of my time in, which is golf, which I, of course, was not very good at either. Now, one night after this, kind of frustrating time in my life, I was working nights at a hospital, a job that I actually really hated. I slammed my fist down on the desk and I said, you know what, I'm not going to spend the better half of my 20s working here. I'm going to figure out how to get this freedom, how to get out of my job, how to make some money on the internet. And the only way I really knew how to do that was by playing poker. So I really recommitted to mastering PLO and fulfilling my potential as a poker player. I really I resolved that I was going to do whatever it takes to get my life handled and to get my poker game handled. So now that my livelihood depended on how well I was going to play, and my ability to both quit my job and then also actually make a living once I quit my job, I realized that I wasn't going to have to just beat the low stakes. I was going to have to actually beat the mid stakes too. So what I did, I actually took about half my bankroll. I purchased high-end coaching from a guy named Tom, which you'll learn a little bit more about in a bit. And I worked endlessly with Chance Corneth and some other high-stakes guys in Las Vegas, who I was fortunate enough to know because Chance is from my hometown. You guys actually might have seen Chance make a deep run in the 25K in the Bahamas yesterday. He's also deep now in the main event in the Bahamas. I think the winner gets several $1 million. He's really one of the best players out there, and actually it was nice to get to know him at a young age and really be mentored by him and some other guys. So at the time, as I'm getting to know these high stakes guys, things are really starting to click. I'm actually starting to make money. I'm starting to realize the fruits of my labor and actually get some money from all this pain and energy that I'd invested into PLO. So right when I'm starting to make money, I built up a nice roll. I think I had about a 20K roll at this time. I'm playing mid stakes very comfortably on my own. Black Friday happens. And for us Americans, that was a huge watershed moment. I was really faced with, do I want to play poker professionally? Is this for me? How passionate am I about poker? And what does this mean to me? Like, am I basically willing, the options are very limited. Am I willing to move somewhere to play live professionally? Or am I going to have to play online on some shady site and risk being basically robbed of my money again? So really, it was a way for me to prove to myself how serious I was. And I actually decided to double down and take poker even more seriously and recommit. So I moved to Las Vegas to grind live until I could either play online again legally, or until I was just going to figure it out. And this is one of my favorite quotes, actually. It's on my whiteboard over here. It says, necessity is the mother of innovation. And I really believe that you're not forced to have these breakthrough moments or have these big breakthroughs unless you're forced to. And this certainly was proven during this time in my life. So I put my nose to the grindstone. I played nonstop. I remember actually very specifically, I would play from 10 in the morning until about 8 at night online. I would shower, I would go to the gym, and then I would go right back out to the casino, and I would play from about 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. And I did this for a couple of years. That's really how I built my bankroll back after being basically robbed from Black Friday. So in 2012, actually, without really any tourney experience, which is pretty nice, I got 58th in the WSOP main event for 128 grand. I took that money, I traveled Europe. I lived in Sweden for a period of time so that I actually could play online. Right around this time, full tilt poker was coming back, and I saw it as a good opportunity to take advantage of the soft games. After I got back from Europe, I arrived just in time several months later for the WSOP, and all things considered, I don't know. I mean, I might be biased, but I think it turned out okay. Here we are, right after I won the bracelet in the 1500 no limit six backs for about 325 grand. Obviously, it's like the crowning achievement for most players is to win a WSOP bracelet. And although PLO has been my passion for about 10 years now, I coincidentally won it in no limit. But what's cool is I found that a lot of the skills that I'd picked up playing PLO carried over to no limit very easily. So through my tribulations of, being not very good at poker and it seeming like it was very easy for everyone else, I realized that basically nobody has really streamlined from point A of not knowing very much about a game to point B, C, D, E, F in terms of being able to play profitably, play professionally, win more money all the way from start to finish. It's usually very fragmented, and there's these little golden nuggets of good advice and information kind of laying out there through books and videos. As a result, I've spent really the last 5 or 6 years refining the exact path that helps players achieve success in PLO. I've helped thousands of players master the fundamentals, increase their win rate, and move up in stakes. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we're going to go through 2 parts. The first part is how to streamline your PLO education. All right. Now, there's one of my favorite stories. It was from some entrepreneurial training that I heard, but I think that this metaphor has been used everywhere. is there's a plane that crashes in the jungle, right? And the passengers, they get out of the plane and they're distraught, and all they have is these machetes to weave their way through the jungle. So they all just start chopping like crazy, and they're sort of like weaving through the jungle aimlessly, trying to find the city so that they can seek help and seek refuge and all of that. And they do this for a couple of days, and then eventually one of them climbs the tree and says, "Guys, the city is that way." And they realize that they had just kind of been, spinning their wheels, or however you want to call it. And it really is it's an interesting metaphor for me, because it highlights the benefits of being strategic when you're learning something, whether it be a language, learning how to win more money playing poker, really anything in your life. It's important to be strategic. Nowadays there's a lot of options available, and a lot of different people are pitching you on ways to make more money playing PLO, whether it be using solvers, listening to podcasts. You need to have better bankroll management. Oh no, you need to post on this forum, or you need to have good rake back, or you need to read this book. It's just all over the place. And one of my favorite entrepreneurs, he says that most people aren't strategic; they're actually being tactical. And there's just a lot of tactics out there that kind of promise the silver bullet of learning how to make more money playing not only PLO but also poker. So what we want to do is we want to focus on being strategic, because you can get better results in less time. So, more importantly, you stop feeling like you're never really doing enough. I mean, is there anybody else on this webinar that feels like they constantly are being left out on certain trainings, or, they're not winning as much as they could because they haven't read X book, or read this blog, or listened to this podcast, or watched this YouTube video? It happens to me all the time, and I think it happens to most players. They just never feel like they're doing enough. This is kind of the poker economy in a nutshell. In this period, at the bottom of the period are these new players. There's the poker economy in terms of numbers is mostly new players, and the second level up is micro or smaller break-even players. And I think that the majority of players in this webinar certainly fall into the category of like new players, transitioning no limit players, or micro or small stakes break-even players. So if our goal is to be strategic and to really work our way up the pyramid, we want to have a step-by-step process to do so. So this is what I found to be really helpful. First step is to focus on developing good default lines. It helps you build solid fundamentals so that you can reduce variance. Now, what do I mean by developing good, solid default lines? What I mean is, against an aggressive player, I'm betting with these types of hands, or I'm not betting on these types of boards. Like, this is my default line, barring any other specific reads. A lot of players, when they start to tell me hand histories, that's actually exactly what I ask them. I say, what's your default line on this board? What's your default line at this SPR? What is your default strategy against this player? And frankly, like, as you move up, you can adjust all of those things, but really the first thing you need to do, besides obviously figuring out the actual equities in the hands and the equity matchups, is to develop good default lines against a broad range of players at a broad range of stack depths on a broad range of board textures. And if you're an online player, this will actually help you play more tables, because you're not getting bogged down by all of the different decisions. You've already got your default lines. Your default lines are better than the other players at the tables, so you can start to point and click a little bit faster. Step 2 is to focus on adjusting to specific players. So we already have built our default lines. Now we want to focus on adjusting to specific players and adjusting to how they're adjusting to you, right? So, two primary, as like a basic example, I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar have heard of the two types of dead money, which are passive dead money, which is the key to beating low stakes, and aggressive dead money. Passive dead money, you win by betting and take it down the pot. Let's say there's $100 in the pot. You bet $50 and you bet $50, your opponent folds, or your opponent calls and then folds to a turn bet. Aggressive dead money is dead money that's won by bluffing or rebluffing. So like that would be by way of a check raise or by way of a 3-bet bluff. It's money that's won by rebluffing or semi-bluffing, frankly. All right, so let's talk about the 3 most common study mistakes. First is burnout. When people are really enthusiastic about a game, this happens all the time with PLO. People cannot wait to get their hands into PLO. And in fact, a lot of people tell me they feel as passionate about PLO. PLO is nice because it's reignited their passion for studying poker. I mean, hey, I'll be the first to say it gets kind of tedious studying the same game all the time. I absolutely suffered with that in No Limit, but it's nice nowadays because I actually can go back and forth. If I'm feeling passionate about No Limit, there's a big tournament coming up. A good example is I'm playing the main event at the 5 Diamond next month in Vegas. And right now I'm kind of getting really nerdy and into the lab about No Limit tournaments because, I've been spending a lot of time the last few months on PLO stuff. So now I want to work on No Limit tournaments. The second is to practice active learning, take notes and create your own study guides. Again, like a lot of people have this impression that they just should blitz through as much content as possible and it'll all somehow by way of osmosis, like make their way into their, into their brain. And that's actually just really not how it works. You need to kind of take things slow, internalize big hands, work through the numbers a little bit. You need active learning in order to make a significant impact on your actual playing. And the third is don't get a coach yet. As a poker coach, it's kind of weird for someone to say, hey, don't get a poker coach. But seriously, most people do not need a poker coach. You'll know when you need a poker coach when you can pinpoint your biggest weakness or what is actually causing you to lose the most money playing poker. Ideally, when I work with students or actually when I work with a poker coach, what I do is I say, all right, I'm purchasing 5 hours with you. For 5 hours, we're going to tackle 3-bet pots without the initiative, or we're going to tackle single raised pots on paired boards, or you're going to teach me everything that needs to be known about monotone boards. I really like to take it one area of my game at a time and build it out that way. All right, part 2, which is going to be a little more technical, but as mentioned, this is basically the rundown that I give not only in my course, but also to new students that I take on. This is an expanded version of a section from my former PLO coach's book from Tom Chambers, who maybe some people have heard of. And this is more of like a condensed version. It's sort of my own take on his approach to it. But nevertheless, like these are the concepts that I think are core to a winning PLO strategy, both for live and online players. So let's get into it. There's 6 core PLO concepts. The first one that we're going to go over right now is the importance of the power hands, right? Everybody, like one of the first things that you read in any PLO book or any basic strategy PLO book is about drawing to the nuts. You always want to draw the nuts. You want the suit, you want the nut flush draw, right? You want the nut straight draw. Drawing to the nuts is huge. When you look through as an online player, when you look through your database, you really do start to see an incredible trend of what your most profitable hands are. And even though sometimes, your mind can be biased and it feels like you hear this all the time. Oh man, my aces always lose, or my kings always lose. It's just not true. Completely false. Your big hands, like big high carded hands, good kings, good aces, good rundowns. These are the hands that make you all of the money. So the power hands, they make the biggest sets, biggest straights, biggest flushes. It's just a key. You can't not play these hands. It's just like in Hold'em. Big hands are where you make all of the money. Frankly, a lot of easy profit comes from post-flop domination within these categories because as a lot of, if you're a live player on this webinar, I'm sure you've seen how loose people are pre-flop and they just start chasing equity. They start getting coolered in situations where they really shouldn't be coolered. And it's just an easy way to make profit is being on the good end of post-flop domination within these categories. Hey, it's the same for no limit too, right? I mean, the easiest way to print money and hold them is to be on the good end of domination in terms of big cards and pair over pair combinations. The second core PLO concept is that it isn't true that someone always has the nuts, but the nuts is always relevant. So contrary again to what most people say, I don't like PLO. I always feel like I'm running into the nuts, or I'm always getting coolered. Well, it's not true that somebody always has the nuts, but the nuts is always relevant. The important considerations are what is the nuts? How likely are the nuts in my opponent's range? And what's our equity against the nuts? Especially when you're in some bad runs or, it just feels like you're running into the nuts all the time. But again, one of the most common concepts that I need to dispel with my students is like, well, the nuts on, let's say the board comes 3, 4, 7, and you're playing someone who has a very tight range. Well, even though the nuts is possible. It's really not likely, given that it's a tight range for our opponent. It's kind of like in Hold'em when it's a very aggressive dynamic. Let's say it's like button versus big blind, or it's blind versus blind, or it's cutoff versus button, and the board comes ace high. There's, sure, like people do have an ace a lot because people play a lot of ace-x and Hold'em, but how often people have a good ace or a top set, it really depends on the preflop range. So it's important to understand how likely is the nuts. And again, we see kind of like an example board down here. Jack 10-9 two-tone. It's important to not only identify what the nuts currently is, but also what our equity against the nuts is. So, there's certainly hands here that even if someone has king queen, they could have an equity advantage against the nuts. So if somebody has a set and a flush draw, and the other person has a naked straight, they actually do have an equity advantage. Or if you have, ace queen jack 10, two pair, not flush draw, not gutter, you do have an equity edge against people who have a naked straight. So it's not just about what is the nuts, it's about what is our equity against the nuts. All right, the third core PLO concept is that hand values, they run close together. So obviously this means that we should just play every hand, right? Because hell, you can't miss them all. Now, whether or not this is actually a Sammy Farha quote, I'm not really sure. But when I did Google poker quotes, this quote came up, so I thought it was kind of funny. Hey, it's not true that you have to play every hand just because equities run closer together. I already mentioned in a previous slide about the importance of being on the good end of domination. But it is certainly a main concept of PLO that the equities do run a lot closer together. Now, expanding on that is there's a big difference between heads up and multi-way pots. Equity edges are very important, certainly, especially in short stack scenarios when you're getting all in pre-flop, or you're getting like the majority of your stack in pre-flop. Hey, like having a 2 to 5% equity edge against a range is significant, right? But when you're playing a little bit deeper stacked in these cash games, certainly for you live players out there, if you're playing these deep stacked full ring games, obviously you can imagine that generally stacks are very deep. People have 200, even 300, 500 big blinds all the time. So having like a few equity percentage preflop is a lot less important when there's going to be multiple streets played. There's going to be a lot of money going in. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to go. I didn't mean to click through too fast. So playability post-flop matters a lot. Now, it's not to say that in Hold'em, for example, that post-flop playability is not important. It's just a little bit different in PLO, especially when there's a lot more combinations available. The nuts is more common. Playability just goes up a little bit more. And expanding on the kind of what I've brushed over already on this slide and previous slides, we can see here from the quick fact that a top tier hand such as ace, ace, jack 10 double suited is only a 70% favorite against a random hand, which I say only because, having 70% equity is a lot. But if you compare that to Hold'em, where, aces has 80% against almost every hand. So it's just kind of highlights that even the best hand preflop is still only 70% hand, or 70% favorite against a random hand. All right, core PLO concept number 4. The most important fact about a starting hand is the distribution of equities that it flops. Raw preflop equity has very little to do with how to play a hand, and we've already touched on this a little bit, and this is a very different mindset than in No Limit. So we're going to get into this more here in a second, but a better way of describing this is that if you're ahead preflop at Hold'em, it's very likely that your hand is going to be best by the river. But in PLO, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, yes, equities run closer together preflop, but equities from street to street also change a lot. And what I'm saying is that in Hold'em, if I have ace queen and you have ace jack, well, there's the hand value is very static from street to street. But in PLO, it changes a lot. Most hands have ideal situations for them based on their distribution of equity post-flop, which you'll see here in a moment. So how exactly do we figure out what the ideal situation is for each hand? There's 2 very important concepts. First is polarized equity distribution. Now, what having a polarized equity distribution means is that you either connect with the flop very hard and you have a lot of equity against the range of hands that your opponents can have, or you don't flop very much at all. So for example, King, King, 7 deuce rainbow flops a set or better about 12% of the time. And you can imagine that especially in multi-way pots, King, King, 7 deuce rainbow is pretty trashy. There's very few boards that you're willing to put in a lot of money. Sure, if it checks down to the river, it's going to have a reasonable amount of showdown a high percentage of the time, particularly in heads-up pots. But in terms of, blocker capability, in terms of, hands that I would love to play, King, King, 7 deuce rainbow falls at the bottom end of that spectrum. But it does have about 12% of flops that are very, very good for it, where it flops top boat, top set, that kind of thing. These are the hands that are very ideal for multi-way deep stacked pots. Now, as I mentioned, if you overset somebody, you have kind of a stranglehold on the hand, if your kings do provide you with a good nut blocker, you can leverage them that way. So, the goal with these polarized hands is to really overnut our opponents. You can see here another example of a polarized hand is ace 9 6 4 with a nut suit. If you flop the nut flush, you're gonna have a ton of equity against your opponent's range. Likewise, if you flop the nut straight, that kind of thing. Okay, what is smooth equity? What are hands that are a good example of smooth equity distribution? So hands that have a lot of suitedness and connectedness. So Jack 10 9 8 double suited, ace ace king 10 double suited. These are great hands that are well suited to practically any post-flop scenario. If you're short stacked, you can call 3-bet profitably. If you're deep stacked, you don't mind putting in a lot of money pre-flop because there's a lot of different boards where you're able to continue, so you don't have to worry about putting in a lot of money pre-flop and then folding post-flop. With those hands that have a lot more of a polarized equity distribution, that's a major concern, is committing a lot of money pre-flop and then having to fold on a broad range of flops. And as a side note here, you can see any unpaired hand in PLO actually flops a pair 40% of the time, which is pretty insane. A double suited hand flops a flush draw about a quarter of the time. So you can imagine this is why we're so comfortable playing these big re-raised pots, because there's so many different scenarios where we're going to be able to continue. And as I just mentioned, they do very well in 3-up pots and heads-up pots, and we're just happy to be dealt these at any point. Now, I included a couple of graphs here to further give you a good visualization on what I'm talking about. So here, this is called an equity distribution graph. You can go to Pro Poker Tools. You can graph them for free. There's a lot of other softwares that have these now, including Monker Solver and Poker Juice, and a lot of different softwares have this now. But I think the easiest and most basic illustration of this can be found on Pro Poker Tools. So what this is showing us is when we have King, King, 7 deuce rainbow, how much equity do we have on what percentage of flops? So going back to what I told you, you can see here on this graph, my cursor won't come over, but you can see here, 12% of the time we basically have a ton of equity in the pot, right? You can see right here on the left, like on its top 12% of boards, it's got, we'll just do 10%. On its top 10% of boards, it's got more than 75% equity against aces. But then we see a dramatic drop off from, the top about 18% of boards and below. It just doesn't have that much equity on practically any flop. Now, this is against exactly aces. It's a little bit skewed because, we're not going to be against aces every hand, but it's more so to really illustrate, bring home the point of what polarized equity distribution looks like, or a hand that has polarized equity distribution looks like. Now let's see the dramatic difference for Jack 10 9 8 double suited versus pocket aces. We can see it's much more consistent, and we're just flopping a lot of equity on a lot of different boards. There's not as, on 10% of boards, we've got a stranglehold on the hand, but you can see it just levels off a lot. And you can imagine that this is why double suited hands with a lot of connectivity are good in 3-bet pots, because you're going to flop something that you can continue with a high percentage of the time. Now, let's move on to the 5th core PLO concept, which is cumulative equity, right? Redraws, blockers, pairs, and weakened backdoor draws. Now, in a game of 55-45s, minor pieces of equity are certainly the difference makers, particularly nowadays when players are getting a little bit better pre-flop than they used to be. Taking these small edges when it's 55-45s in re-raised pots, when a lot of money is going in pre-flop, matters a lot. People aren't as fit or fold. In games where people aren't as fit or fold post-flop, you need those types of backdoor, those little pieces of backdoor equity. You need those little pieces of extra blockers or extra equity to make a c-bet profitable. So our mission is to really realize our equity and also block their equity, which you'll see in a moment with this example, is important. So I'll give you a good example. We 3-bet to 10% of our stack with ace-ace, 8-3 rainbow in the first example. And in the second example, we 3-bet with the hand that I mentioned in the quick stat, which is ace-ace, jack-10 double suited. And we can really see the difference in our equity on this board, right? With the second hand, we've got a nut gutter. We've got 2 backdoor flush draws. It really just adds a lot of equity into our hand. And, but with the first hand, frankly, especially when we're deep stacked, we're really kind of in no man's land on a lot of runouts, right? If we bet and get called and the turn's like a 6 or a 9 or an 8 or a 10, or there's just so many different turns where, especially because we don't have a backdoor flush draw, especially because we have a crappy backdoor wheel draw, it's just it's a little tougher to realize our equity, and we also get drawn out more often. With the second hand, of course, we backdoor more coolers to people. It increases your equity so much. So something that's subtle on this board can actually be a lot. And in fact, like you can see here, the equity added by a backdoor flush draw in a typical hand versus hand matchup is anywhere between 1 to 3%. Now, that's only one backdoor flush draw. In this specific hand, having 2 backdoor flush draws in the nut gutter is going to add a ton of equity to our hand. But the point being, like, this is kind of an extreme example, but the point being is that, blocking people's backdoors and also having some backdoor equity gives you a huge edge. Certainly in single raised pots, but also in re-raised pots as well. All right, core PLO concept number 6. So much more often than in no limit hold'em, we actually would prefer our opponent to fold the flop. Now this goes back to what I said earlier in terms of the equities from street to street in hold'em are very static. It's one of the reasons why people, when you watch a lot of these high stakes guys, and in general, when there's 2 players who really kind of know what they're doing and hold'em, especially in single raised pots, it's kind of passive, because especially when you're polarized and you're ahead, you're usually like really ahead, like you're way ahead. So you're okay with, allowing your opponent to catch up, improve to something that, that is like a worse hand against you so that you can value bet it or give them a chance to bluff. Now, one of the primary elementary lessons of hold'em is that there's really 2 main reasons to bet, right? There's to bet for value, or there's to make worse hands call, or you want to bet as a bluff in order to make better hands fold. Now, let's talk about, and before I go to the next slide, hopefully you can think about how that applies to PLO and if those same rules actually apply in PLO. And what about betting for protection? Like, is betting for protection viable? This has been one of the great arguments in hold'em for a long time. What about in PLO? Like, especially because the equities are a little closer, is betting for protection actually something that is a viable reason to bet? So in PLO, betting for protection actually is viable, much more so than in hold'em. Because again, the hand values run close together, and oftentimes folding is a bigger mistake than calling. In fact, there's far less way ahead or way behind situations in PLO than in hold'em. So giving free cards is a big mistake. It's crazy when you start running a lot of the equity simulations in PLO and you realize that these hands that seem like they should have practically no equity actually do have between 20 or 25% equity, just because of all of the backdoors and all of the different combinations. So many times even it's fine to bet and get people to fold and not realize their equity, rather than checking back and forcing a situation where they're only willing to put more money into the pot when you're beat. Mention that part. All right, so let's go through a hold'em example. So we raise kings in position, and let's say it's button versus big blind or cutoff versus big blind or something like that. And we have a decision between betting or checking on ace-7 deuce rainbow. Now, checking is a pretty good option. You're unlikely to really get action from worse. Let's say that your opponent has a 7 in side cards, or he has an underpair, or he has, jack tens and some other Broadways. Well, their equity is very bad. So if somebody has an ace, you're in bad shape. Somebody has a 7 inside cards, they're in bad shape. Someone who has unpaired, like an unpaired combination, is drawing very bad, depending on what their combo is. So there's a lot of good viable options for checking back. And especially like if you check back and someone has a hand like Jack 10 or Queen Jack, and they turn a Queen or a Jack, you're almost always going to get at least one street. And generally, like if you were to bet 2+ streets with kings in position on this board, you probably beat. So a lot of times people will try to play kings for 1 or maybe 2 streets if they have a bad image. But in general, you see what I'm saying. Is that there's a lot of good reasons for checking back. Now, let's look at a PLO example. So now we have like king, and some side cards in position on ace 7 deuce rainbow. Again, let's assume that it's cutoff versus big blind or button versus big blind or something like that. Now, betting is actually generally better than checking. Although you should balance checking sometimes. Let's just use this for the sake of illustrating a point. A random 7 or a deuce has 30 to 40% equity. People will actually fold that a decent amount, especially if you have a tough aggressive image. You're not going to get value on later streets from worse. So if you check back, it's tricky if your opponent bets because you've kind of capped your range, and it's not easy to call 2 streets with naked kings on most runouts on ace 7 deuce rainbow. So betting prevents you from getting bluffed, which is nice. And it also doesn't allow your opponent to realize their equity. I mean, even there's a lot of hands, like let's say someone has a hand like 5, 6, 8, 9, or 6, 8, 9, 10. It's actually a lot of backdoor straight possibilities, right? Like people can turn a wrap on a lot of cards. Or if people have king, queen, jack 10, or a variety of other cards, they could have. There's a lot of gutter combinations, for example. There's 3-4 combos. There's 5-3 combos. So again, those are hands where some people might fold. I mean, I'm not going to get into semantics about they might check raise and stuff like that, but you see my point. All right, when should we actually value check? So these are situations where you're checking because you don't have like a made hand, but you have a lot of equity in the pot. These are situations where your opponents are unlikely to fold, and we have a hand that has good equity that cannot play for stacks. And we want to lock in our equity and allow ourselves to realize that equity. This is also when we have a significant playability edge on later streets. So I'll give you a good example. Let's say that we're facing some aggressive opponents. The action is checked to us on the button in a multi-way pot, and we have like the bare nut flush draw on jack 10-8 two-tone. Checking makes sense. This could be a situation where we have like ace 7-6-5 with the nut flush draw. I mean, granted, we have a gutter in that example, but it's a non-nut gutter. It's a pretty worthless gutter, especially in a multi-way pot. I wouldn't consider the 9 to generally be like a nut out, especially in a multi-way pot. Maybe in a heads-up pot, but in a multi-way pot, probably not. So checking makes a lot of sense, right? We have the danger of getting check raised. If we have ace 7-6-5 with a nut flush draw, we really don't want to get check raised, considering that if we get check raised on this board, we're likely facing the nuts or a hand that has a lot of equity against us. And we don't want to have to call the flop, fold to some turn bets, that sort of thing. And as I mentioned, we get to take the free card. So we get to see the spade for free. So this is a good example of being able to value check. Whereas, in Hold'em, you can certainly check this back in a multi-way pot. It obviously depends on what your other card is. But the nut flush draw on this board in Hold'em is the naked nut flush draw on this board in Hold'em is a lot stronger than the PLO. All right, let's look at some other examples of good spots to check back in PLO. So we have ace king 8-6 double suited properly. This is a beautiful hand, especially when we are in position. And it comes ace 7-4 rainbow. Now, again, I don't want to get in too many semantics about whether it's a multi-way or heads-up pot, but just briefly, I mean, if it's a heads-up pot, I'm going to be more likely to bet this. Again, it depends a little on where I open from, where the callers were open, where the callers, what the position of the callers was, what's the SPR with each player. But in general, we're just looking to use this as an example of highlighting some bigger topics. So you can see when we have ace king 8-6 double suited, the benefit of really being double suited. Not only do we have top pair and a nut gutter, but we also have 2 backdoor flush draws. If we do check back, there's no turn that we're going to fold on. Any ace 7-4, we're going to call at least 1 bet. We're going to turn a flush draw a lot of the time, and there's just a lot of there's just a lot of excellent runouts for us. We can induce bluffs, we can call down. I already mentioned that. If we check back, it may be perceived that we're trying to pot control. Depends on our image, and you'll get a lot of stabs from players. But again, we can just induce bluffs that we can call down, which is nice. And what's beautiful about this is that on a lot of the cards that make us 2-pair, people may try to bluff. And this is just a great hand to balance with. And you can see, like, let's say we turn king, or we river a king, or we turn an 8, or we turn a 6, or we end up with aces up by the river. There's many, many good opportunities to value bet thinly when players check to us. So this is a great example of a good spot to check back. Although I would bet it sometimes. Probably in heads-up pots, I'd bet it most of the time. All right, so we talked a lot about some technical aspects today. I want to begin talking about the course that Steve mentioned earlier and what's available today. So here's the deal. What I just showed you is, a slice of the system that I've personally used to win more money playing PLO and to move up in stakes myself. And if you'd like me to help you implement it, of course, I'd be delighted. Win 1K is the curriculum that shows you how to master the fundamentals, increase your win rate, and move up in stakes faster than any other courses or videos online. So if you want to permanently nail down the core PLO fundamentals, learn how to play aggressive PLO without spewing chips, play comfortably out of position, even against tough regulars, and crush 3-bet pots, this is the course for you for sure. And also, if you want to know exactly how to play the turn, even when the nuts change, I know a lot of guys who play both online and live get really annoyed by when, let's say that you flop top set, you get 1 or 2 callers, and the turn brings the flush or fills the straight. You want to know how to play the turn both in position and out of position. This is a great course for that. This course also will show you how to pick the best bet sizing on the river, both for thin value and as a big bluff. You're going to learn a proven, repeatable framework for making plus EV decisions in every hand. You're going to waste 0 time sorting through training created by guys who aren't even proven winners. And this is specifically for you if you identify with any of that, or if you found those holes in any other training that you've seen. All right, so here's how we're going to do it. There's basically 4 different modules in Win 1K. The first module is the foundational module. It's similar to the topics that we went over here in the core PLO concepts, the pre-flop module, the post-flop module, the late street module, and then there's also a live play video from Scoop champion Alien Slayer, who is a former student of mine, close friend, and he's a hell of a PLO player. He's won well into the 7 figures playing both small, mid stakes, and high stakes PLO. And there's also some case studies from my best students describing exactly how they were able to actually graduate from the micro or the low stakes into the high stakes. All right, so let's talk about the foundational module. As I mentioned, it's similar to the materials that you just saw. We're going to talk about why focusing on playing the power hands in PLO is the easiest source of profit, how to set yourself up to win even when you don't have good cards, why preflop is the most important street in poker, and we're going to introduce the postflop big 3 so that you can adjust to any game, stack depth, or setting. That could be tournaments, could be short stacking a cash game, could be a deep stacking a live cash game. All of those, the big 3 applies directly to. We've got the preflop module, which includes the one preflop indicator that every plus EV decision rests on, and you're going to be able to identify it. Preflop open sizing recommendations from every position, so you can develop default lines and play more tables, as we mentioned earlier. It's got the golden rule for isolating limpers, so you know exactly which hands to build pots with. Talks about which hands you can profitably call 4-bets with, and it talks about the best hands for 3-betting and calling 3-bets with. In the post-flop module, you're going to learn how to develop a multi-street plan so you never bet without a reason, and so you avoid being caught in no man's land on later streets, which everybody hates, both in No Limit and PLO. You're going to learn killer lines to fight back against aggressive players so you never feel like you're getting run over. You're going to learn the secret math behind blocker play and how to identify when to empty the clip with barrels or surrender the pot. You're going to learn more than 25 carefully selected hand histories so you can see the logic behind high-level plays and avoid common pitfalls. Now, I want to thank Steve and Advanced Poker Training for giving me the opportunity to share with you guys my passion for PLO, educate you a little bit on the core PLO concepts for becoming a profitable PLO player, and just spend time with you here this evening. Now, as Steve mentioned, there's an outrageous offer that, truthfully, I have never made on a webinar. I've really never made available to anyone, which is to purchase Win1K for $197. And this course is normally $497. I've really never changed the price, frankly, because it's sold well, and I think that there's just a ton of value. I actually spent a year straight developing this course, then updating the course with new case studies, with what are called rapid fire hand histories, which are me basically going through my database, talking through street by street, which hands you should be playing from what position, and taking it street by street. I mean, this is really, and I'm not just saying this because it's my course and I'm talking to you about it today. I really think it's the best course out there for live and online players, specifically if there's live players out here on the webinar. This has been an extremely effective course for live players because it allows them to sort of understand from a theoretical standpoint how PLO works and how to adjust in the live environment. So hopefully that answers, or hopefully you were educated by the webinar today. I think that Steve is going to open it up to questions, if I understand that correctly, and I'm happy to answer anything PLO related. If you have maybe a short hand history question, or if you have any questions about the course or anything else, that's what I'm here for. So I'll take as much time as I'm allowed.
All right, great. Thanks, John. And I am online now, and I do have some questions already from people. And I just want to point out, again, just to reiterate what John said, really, this is a deal he has never made before. He really sells this course all the time for $497. And I only point that out because I know there's a lot of marketing nowadays where you see things that are, supposedly $497, and then they get knocked down. And by the time you finish with it, the final price is $49.95 or something like that. But this is not something like that. He has really never sold this course for $197 before. And really, when his marketing guy did think he was crazy when I convinced him to sell it for this price. So I only point that out to say this offer is being made for 1 week here, and so what you see, there's a link up there I put in the at the top of the chat window there, and that link has a countdown timer on it for 1 week. And at the end of this week, that deal is really going to be gone. So occasionally we've been able to, in the past when we've had offers from, say, Alex Fitzgerald and Jonathan Little and Split Suit, we've been able to, people have written us a few weeks later and said, hey, can I still get in on that deal? And they're often able to still let them in on this deal. But I suspect that is not going to be the case here. So you really have a week to get in on this deal, and I really recommend you do that right now, even tonight, because it's a great course. It's got I believe over 15 hours of video. Isn't that correct, John?
Yeah, that's actually somewhat inaccurate on the good side of things. I've added a lot of content to it over the last couple of years. It's more than 15 hours of actual educational material, but then I also have several hours of case studies for my best students. And it's got PDFs and the whole shebang. It even actually has a 150 question quiz on the materials that are inside of it.
Yeah, and I really like the quiz too, because it makes it much more of an interactive training process. When I went through the material, you've got the videos and the case studies talk about actual people who have implemented techniques like this, and then the quizzes along the way. It's really an interactive course for learning PLO. And John, would you say, is this course appropriate even for the most very beginning PLO players?
So I would say that if you it depends how, you should play a little bit before you get this course. I mean, if you're wondering what a wrap is, or if you, I would say for an ultra beginner, it's not. But for anyone who's played 10 hours, this is a good course for you.
Okay. So how does someone jump into PLO? I think a lot of people kind of associate PLO with being a higher stakes game, but are there actual, let's say, 1, 2 PLO games at most card rooms that they could jump into just to get their feet wet?
Absolutely. You know what I would suggest is if someone really is kind of getting their feet wet, I would suggest going to play, buying in short, buying for 40 big blinds, and playing pretty tight and just kind of getting a feel for what situations make you uncomfortable. If you are playing 1-2, I think that most places you can buy in for, some only allow you to buy in for 100, but I mean, there's still card rooms out there that allow you to buy in 40. I mean, there's even, if you're playing online, you could buy in for 20 big blinds a lot of places. So I would buy in short, and I would just kind of, I would get started at a stake that, you don't get upset if you lose, and you're willing to kind of mix it up and see what areas you feel like you're having some trouble with.
Okay, great.
That's kind of what I did.
So what
frankly.
I'm going to try to do here, John, is if you want to turn off your screen share, I'm going to try to bring the whiteboard up here, and then I'll cut and paste some of the questions that are being asked. I can get this to work right.
Yeah, I see some of them in the chat here.
Okay. What I'll try to do is just so people can see the question while you're answering it. I'm going to try to see if here we go. Here's kind of a beginner question that was asked, but I'll go ahead. I'll let you read that out loud, and then you can go ahead and answer that one. If you can see that. Can you see that question all right, or nothing yet?
I don't see anything yet.
Let me see here. Maybe I'm not doing something right here. Okay, let me try it again. I put a question up there, and it's not showing up. Okay. How about now?
Okay. How do I know exactly how much money is in the pot? So I bet the correct amount when I bet the pot. That's a good question. So, frankly, observation skills. There's actually no real way around it. You're going to just have to keep track of it. Now, if you're playing a live game, you can always ask the dealer. You can just say, what's in the pot? Especially good card rooms, they're always going to know. But if you want to bet the maximum, just say pot. And in fact, an interesting aspect of that is as you move up, players have a lot of tells depending on whether they verbalize pot or whether they put in an oversized chip or something like that. There's actually kind of a lot of metagame there. But again, if you're just starting out, it's just say pot if you want to bet the most you can. Now, calculating what a pot-sized re-raise is a little trickier. It takes more than observation skills. It takes a little bit of simple math. So the easiest way to remember it is it's 3 times the bet that's in front of you plus the dead money that's out there. So let's say you're playing a 5-10 game. You can open to 3x the bet that's in front of you, which is, since there's not a bet in front of you, you can raise to 3 times the big blind plus the extra dead money in the pot, which is just the small blind. So if it's 5-10, you can open to 35. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. All right, I'm going to put another question up here.
So 3 times the bet plus the dead money that's in the pot.
Let's see if we can get this over here. I'll
give one more quick example while you're finding another question. Let's say that it's post flop and there's 100 in the pot, and you check and your opponent bets the pot for 100. Now, you can raise 3 times his bet plus whatever money is in the pot, right? So 3 times 100 is 300 plus 100 in the pot. You can raise to 400. That's the essence of pot limit.
All right, you see another question up there?
Do you download the course or do you provide access to it? We don't allow people to download the course directly via download links, but it's all accessible online.
Okay. All right, let me clear that and put another one up here.
Okay.
Do you see that one?
Give an example that one player had the nut straight on the flop and the other player had a set plus a flush draw. Are there other situations like that where the nuts is not the favorite? Yeah, there's tons of favorites like that. But the most common is when there's a straight on the board and the board is two-tone and someone has a set and a flush draw. A set and a flush draw is always going to be, I don't want to say always, but in general, a set and a flush draw will always be a favorite against the current nuts for the most part. It depends a little on blockers, if the other opponent also has like a set and a straight, it's kind of blocking the full house outs, and depends if the other opponent has flush draw blockers. But in general, yes, it happens all the time. You see that constantly. That and free roll situations where, if the board comes, let's say King Jack 10, and one player has Ace Queen, and the other player has Ace Queen and a flush draw, or has Ace Queen and two pair, or Ace Queen in a set. Like that happens all the time. Yeah.
So that kind of thing is really, I think, for no limit hold'em players, that's really one of the toughest things to get used to, because when no limit hold'em, when you have the nuts, you're always going to be the favorite. So you're always, you're never in a situation where you don't want to get all your money in. I mean, except for, occasionally you and your opponent might both have the nuts and he has some kind of a redraw on you. But other than that, on the flop, the nuts is always going to be favored over any other hand. Whereas that's not true in PLO, and that kind of takes some getting used to. That you could actually flop the nuts and really be getting your money in bad on the flop there. So
yeah, I will say that that whole aspect of PLO, in my opinion, is a little bit exaggerated. Like where those situations come up is somewhat rare. I mean, there's a lot more. I'll just say this: there's many more situations where people are like they're too scared of the nuts, or they're too scared of that situation, and then they end up losing value. I mean, what's more common is people putting in hands that are way too weak, and people who like flop the nuts lose value. So like let's say it comes like 6, 7, 8, and someone has 9, 10. Well, a lot of times you'll see these people who will like slow down with 9, 10 because like, I was scared he had 9, 10 with the flush draw, or I was scared that he had like a set and a flush draw or something like that. And it's like, man, but the fact is, like, especially at the low stakes games, people they play their entire range pretty fast. So they might have a gutter and the nut flush draw. It could easily have a set and a gutter or something like that. Like that, your hand is still doing really great against their range. So I do find that aspect of PLO is a little bit overstated.
So it sounds like you're saying there probably are bigger mistakes to be made than getting all your money in when you flop the nuts. And by being too cautious, you might end up costing yourself more value than you're saving on that rare occasion that you do flop the nuts and someone actually has a better hand than you.
Yeah, it depends on the stack depth. Certainly, if you flop 9, 10, if you have 9, 10 and the board comes 6, 7, 8 and you don't have any redraws, let's say you have ace, ace, 9, 10 and stacks are very deep. Well, yeah, then you don't want to just be getting in like tons and tons and tons of money. It's a reasonable option to like see a turn card. But with you're 100 big blinds and you have the nut straight, generally it's going to be totally standard getting it in on a 6, 7, 8 board with 2 hearts or something.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Here's our next question. This question is actually the Kenna. This is from the actual Kenna James, because I just talked to him yesterday, and he said he was going to be joining us for the webinar. So he wanted to know, what does overnet mean? I believe that's a term you used during the webinar.
Yeah, I said overnut. So overnutting somebody. So basically, I might have misspoken, meant to say overset, and I said overnet. I probably got a little tongue tied, but I basically meant like cooler somebody. Overset is probably what I meant.
Okay.
I could have said overnut somebody. I don't even think that's an actual phrase. I made it up. Overnetting. We're overnetting people nowadays, guys. It's some advanced. It's some advanced stuff. 2018, we're starting to overnet everybody.
Even poker pros like Kenna James don't know what it means. It's a brand new term.
Here we go. God, I overnetted these people so bad.
Okay. What are the biggest mistakes new PLO players make?
I think that they two mistakes. I think that they call the river too much. They don't fold enough rivers. People are pretty straightforward. At low stakes, I mean, you can never go if you're going to play very exploitably on one street. It's hard to go wrong with overfolding the river. It just is. It's like people just underbluff rivers, and I feel like people are too stationary on rivers. They just are. And actually, on the opposite side of that, I think that people are not aggressive enough on rivers. I think that a lot of players could use a little more aggression on the river. I think that you can get some serious folds. The other common ones are overvaluing crappy double suited hands, especially Hold'em players. They see a hand like 9-8, 4-5 double suited and they think it's a great hand and it's actually trash. Or they see, King, Queen, 4-5 double suited and that's pretty trashy in almost every scenario. So like overplaying these crappy double suited hands, not value betting thin enough, being too passive on the river. I think another thing that separates low stakes players from like mid to high stakes players is just not paying attention to bet sizing. Low stakes players really telegraph their bet sizing a lot. There's a lot of easy money to be made at the low stakes just by simply paying attention. This guy bets a little. This guy, he sizes up a little bit when he's got it, or he kind of sizes down when he's got a weak hand. Those sort of like simple adjustments is just the easiest way to print money. It's not something that you're going to read much about in a book or whatever, but these are like really simple, easy things that just will help you print over time.
So that's probably a good segue into how does bet sizing work in pot limit Omaha? I mean, we know that you're capped at being able to bet the size of the pot, but
right.
How do you, in a typical no limit Hold'em game, you've got, let's say on the flop, your continuation betting, maybe people have standard sizing of 60% of the pot size or 75% of the pot size. Do you think in those same terms in PLO that you have standard bet sizes on different streets, depending on the strength of your hand or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without a doubt. So a good rule of thumb is that when the SPR, the magic number for being able to bet the flop, bet the turn, and then bet the river and be all in is 13. So if the SPR is 13, for those who don't know what SPR is, that means stack to pot ratio. That's like, so let's say that there was no raise on any street. Well, the SPR needs to be 13 or lower in order to play for stacks. So, and that's actually one thing that's interesting about PLO that I noticed with my no limit game was that in PLO, you really do need to pay attention to the SPR because you don't have the luxury of, overbet jamming on the river and being able to play for stacks. Because sometimes, if you miscalculate some bets, this happens all the time in PLO where you're like, I miscalculated. Now, I'm not going to be able to go to bet for pot and be all in. And then your opponent calls and you're like, I really missed out on some value there because I calculated wrong on a previous street. Whereas like in Hold'em, you can just be like, all in, and then they call and you stack them. And that actually leads me to another point where no limit players specifically, something that I hear from no limit players all the time, is their big excuse for not learning PLO is that they're afraid that it's going to be a waste of time or they feel more specifically, they feel like putting time into PLO is going to hinder their no limit game. Like either, that's time that they could be spending learning, improving their Hold'em game. And actually what I've learned is that all of the work that I put into my PLO game really actually improved my no limit game too, because there's aspects of PLO that certainly carry over to no limit and make you a tougher no limit player. Mainly paying attention to stack sizes, SPRs, board textures. In order to be a tough PLO player, you have to have good post-flop skills and not afraid to kind of take it to the streets and play some play turns and rivers against people.
Yeah, and you mentioned before when you were talking about some of the most important skills, the biggest mistakes that new PLO players make, and you mentioned not getting enough value out of hands on the river and maybe being a little too sticky on the river since guys aren't bluffing that much. Those are definitely the identical mistakes that people are making in Hold'em. So So I see your point that, if you get more practice playing on these later streets in PLO, how that could really help your Hold'em game, because the same mistakes you're making in PLO are the mistakes you're making in Hold'em as well.
Absolutely.
So, all right, let's see here. Another question from James. Here's what he says. Did that question come up?
In a live casino, a great win rate is 10 big blinds per hour, or $20 an hour at 1-2. What is a comparable win rate for an excellent PLO player at 2-2 PLO? I think that they're comparable win rates. I think that you can expect a little bit of a higher win rate in PLO for a couple of reasons. One, I do think that live PLO or PLO in general is softer. So if you have a bigger skill edge, let's say that you had two comparable players at both games, I think that the player who plays PLO would win more because the edge is bigger. You might have a little bit higher variance, maybe, but that's only because stacks get a lot deeper in PLO. That's another reason why I think that you make more in PLO, because people get deeper and they make these like grave errors when they're deep. And so that's basically why. I will say also the prevalence of straddling in PLO makes it play bigger. And you'll win more at like a 1-2 game than you would in a Hold'em game. You know what I mean? So like a 1-2 in PLO is not really like a 1-2. It's more of like a 2-5. It's more comparable to a 2-5 Hold'em in terms of size.
So people straddle a lot more often in PLO.
Yeah, way more. Yeah, as in principle, like in general, yeah, I would say so. I think that there's a lot more like nitty regs in Hold'em than there is in PLO.
Okay. Do you find that the mistakes that you mentioned, just going back to that other question from before, that some of the mistakes you mentioned do you see those mistakes even at higher stakes PLO games, or do you see players only making big mistakes at 2-2 PLO, or what about in like the 5-10 games? And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it depends. It depends where you're at. I think I have seen PLO get a little tougher over the years, but I think that that's a general poker trend. I think it would be impossible for poker to get easier in most ways, just because there's more poker training out there, and hey, there's a lot of money to be made playing poker. And in any industry market where there's a lot of money to be made, the market will get more efficient. People will just get better at it. What was internet marketing 10 years ago, right? It was a completely different landscape. And I think that it's kind of, on a much smaller scale, it's like that with poker. I mean, it's just people get better at it. So, yeah, there's some players that make those mistakes, but in general, yeah, like the players at the higher stakes certainly make less mistakes.
Okay, here's a question from Carlos, and I'm laughing a little bit as I read this question, because I think this is something many people would like a solution to, but I'm not sure you'll have a solution to it. He says, I can run $20 up to $500 in 3. Then I move up in stakes and lose it all in 20 minutes. How do I stop doing that?
Discipline. Not sure. I can run
yeah. I'm not
email
sure.
the poker site and block yourself from playing those stakes.
Yeah, Carlos, I wish. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that one too. Obviously, I mean, that happens to everyone that moves up in stakes from time to time. But if that's consistently happening to you, and you don't feel like you're getting cheated in some way, you do have to wonder if the skill level of those players at that stake is a little bit higher than yours, and you need to find out what you're doing wrong so that you can be more competitive at those higher stakes.
Yep.
So I wish I had an easy answer to that one for you, Carlos, but I don't.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's see here. All right. What skills would you focus on first in coaching new PLO players?
Well, I would say pre-flop ranges is a great place to start. It's kind of the cheesy answer, but it's just what I said. Pre-flop, pre-flop mistakes really compound on later streets. Your pre-flop equity really your pre-flop hand determines your post-flop equity. So if you have the wrong ranges pre-flop, it's a difficult. You're starting with a disadvantage, and it's hard to dig yourself out of that hole. So the first step, really, I would say, is I would actually venture to say that if you have a solid understanding of pre-flop play, that's almost all that it takes to beat low stakes. I mean, you can just get such an edge by having good, solid pre-flop ranges, because post-flop should be a lot easier for you to play. You're not going to be in as many marginal situations. You're not going to be making as many bad calls. You're going to be getting more value from your good hands. So I would say you can never go wrong with just having like a good understanding of what, like a good fundamental understanding of what good pre-flop play is. It just goes a long way. Even today, John, like when I do coaching with people, it's like there's actually most of the time I'm just like, fold pre. And yeah, it's played, but there's a lot of these situations where it's all just kind of the culprit is poor pre-flop play.
And so, John, you do private one-on-one coaching. That's correct?
Yeah. I mean, more sporadically nowadays, mostly because I'm just more selective.
Okay, so if someone's interested in private coaching with you, should they email you, or how should they get in touch with you?
Yeah, email me, John, JOHN, at PLOquickpro.com.
All right, I'm sending my email now.
Whatever, Steve. I'll trade you for Hold'em lessons.
All right. Sounds like we got a deal. Okay, let's see. Next question here is, what flops are the most dangerous to typically strong no-limit Hold'em holdings, such as overpairs and top pair, top kicker? So I think this is a lot of no-limit Hold'em players probably have this problem. They switch to PLO, all of a sudden they flop an overpair, they flop top pair, top kicker, and they think they've got a great hand because that was a great hand in no-limit Hold'em. So I think the questions being asked here is, how do you are there times when overpairs and top pair, top kicker are actually good hands in PLO? And if not, what are the danger signs to look for there?
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of it, again, goes back to pre-flop ranges. But generally, boards, when you have aces and it depends a lot on your kickers, obviously. But boards that are generally really connect well with people's ranges are going to be the 8-9X boards, 6-7X boards, Queen Jack X boards. Now, Queen Jack X less so, because if you have an overpair like kings or aces, chances are if it's Queen Jack or Jack 10X, you're going to have a lot of gut shots with it. So your range is going to be a lot stronger. But I would say, when you have overpairs, 8-9X, 9-7X, 6-7X, two-tone, and rainbow are going to be boards that generally you want to be looking to play smaller pots with if you just are there with like a naked open-ender. Or I'm sorry, naked overpair. Okay. I don't know if that's actually if that's the answer, if I answered the question, but I think that's what you were asking.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, let's see. We have a question from Debbie, and she asks, do you vary your ranges on your position? I assume she means pre-flop ranges here.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. The earlier in position you are, it's just like in Hold'em, the earlier in position you are, the more hands that are behind you, so you need a stronger range to continue. So if you like a good rule of thumb is, whenever I'm playing early in position, especially if I'm opening, I really want an ace in my hand, because if you have an ace in your hand, it's going to decrease the odds that someone behind you has aces and will have you in a bad domination scenario. So yeah, of course, you should definitely vary your range based on your position. Tighter from early position, wider from late position. Yeah, absolutely.
Are the opening ranges similar in percentage to Hold'em? I mean, for example, let's say in a Hold'em game, if it's folded to you on the button, you might be open raising with upwards of maybe even 40% of all your hands. Would that be a similar number in PLO?
I think it's similar. I think it's a little higher in PLO, mainly because the positional advantage in PLO, in my opinion, is a little bit greater. And it comes back to because of the way the equities, the way the equities are set up in the game. Equities are closer, and If somebody has a good hand out of position and hold them, they can kind of just go to the death and check call you down. Whereas in PLO, it's not quite that easy because people can have a lot more combinations of value. So I think that a normal range on the button can be anywhere between 50 to 70% based on how often people are 3-betting you from the blinds, how often they're defending, what your image is. So I think even wider in position, certainly.
Okay, wow. So you'd be open anywhere from 50 to 70% of all your hands from the button if it's folded to you.
I think at low stakes games, I think that 40% is way too tight. I think that there's just going to be low stakes players are going to be making so many mistakes out of position. So, if it really depends. Like the most important factor is how often are they 3-betting you? Because if they 3-bet you, you either have to fold or continue with kind of a crumbing hand. So if people aren't 3-betting you, you can really just go crazy on the button because you don't have to worry about surrendering your equity pre-flop very often. You're going to be able to realize your equity on the button more. You're going to have a good price on just taking the money down pre-flop. So if people aren't 3-betting you, you should be playing a ton of buttons, like 65 to 75%, depending on how bad they are.
Okay. Wow. Okay, we gotta.
Yeah, against like very tight players or people who don't 3-bet, you can just go crazy on your button.
Great. Okay. Jody asks, what kind of range should you be playing when a game is really loose pre-flop and a lot of times there's a 3 or 4-way all-in? So it sounds like she's talking about a really wild game where people are just going all in pre-flop 3 or 4 ways.
Yep. Jody, were you at my game the other night? I think you were. I was at a game just like this the other night. I swear that was you. So there's an easy rule of thumb is that the looser a game is, as a game becomes looser, the importance of having big cards goes up. I mentioned I talked briefly about the power hands. And, as stacks become deeper and as people's ranges become looser, being on the good end of domination is really important. So if it's just like in Hold'em. If you were playing a Hold'em game and it was the same scenario where there was 3 or 4 all-ins pre, well, you would really want to stick to like ace jack, ace queen, ace king, tens plus. Like these are like really, really powerful combinations. So, it's not particularly glamorous. It's not sexy, but, having like good, strong starting hand requirements pre-flop is the way to go. If you're trying to appear looser or you're looking for spots where you can widen your range, do it when you're getting the right price and you have good relative position. But, you really need to be disciplined and avoid investing a lot of money pre with hands like, queen, jack, 7-6 with a jack high suit or something like that. You want to really be looking to play hands like ace, king, jack 9 with a suit or, a variety of those types of hands. Big cards become key.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Rick. Rick says, taking the top starting hands, how many of the top hands are you willing to get it all in with pre-flop?
It's a bit of a complicated question. It depends on how deep the stacks are. So if we're playing like 200 big blinds deep, well, literally I'm only getting all in pre-flop with aces. It's just, unless a player is particularly crazy, only aces. Now, if people have, 50 big blinds or 100 big blinds and it's an aggressive dynamic, we're going to start to get in like 7.5% of hands. All of my aces combos, my good kings, all of my ace king king combos, a lot of my ace queen queen combos. So it's going to end up being closer to like 7%.
Okay. All right.
Again, it depends a lot on stack depth. It depends a lot on positions. If I open under the gun and get 3-bet from middle position, well, my range for getting it in pre-flop is going to be very tight. It's going to be like aces or very good kings or ace king king. But again, like it really just depends on how aggressive the person is. If the person is 3-betting, 10 to 15%, getting in double suited kings pre-flop is like a slam dunk. But if the person's 3-betting only single digits, then it becomes a little trickier.
You mentioned to me the other day when we were talking how having pocket aces pre-flop can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, because if you 3-bet with it and you don't get enough of your stack in, your opponents may be able to pigeonhole you a little bit as to having pocket aces, and so you're going to have trouble on the flop, perhaps, since they're able to narrow down your range so concretely. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think when you and I were discussing, I might have been talking about 4-bet pots. I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on the dynamic, but certainly like 3-bet pots, people are, especially nowadays, they're 3-betting a lot of non-aces stuff. So it's not like the old days where people pretty much only 3-bet aces or like Jack 10, 9, 8 double suited exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's important to have a 3-betting range that covers a decent amount of board textures, so that doesn't happen. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what exactly we were talking about, but I think it was 4-bet pots where like certainly if you're playing a lot of live poker, 4-betting ranges are almost always like just aces. People just 4-bet live so much tighter than they do online. So
yeah, maybe it was 4-bet pots we were talking about, but we talked about the problem with if there was a 4-bet pot and you were really deep, and so let's say you were only getting in 20% of all your chips pre-flop. Yep. And all of a sudden your opponent knows you have nothing but pocket aces in your range, and you're really going to be in some trouble on the flop there when you haven't been able to get enough of your chips in pre-flop.
Yep, that's right. That scenario happens all the time. It was kind of a common thing back in the day to just try to have people commit a ton of money pre-flop and then play these like double-suited hands that had good equity distribution against aces to just try to bust their aces, because people would take aces way too far. So that's a really common beginner mistake. Somebody asked earlier about what the most common mistakes are for new PLO newcomers, and certainly that's one, is just overplaying aces. I mean, you see it a lot less nowadays, but you do see it a lot where Hold'em people come over and they just put way too much money in with especially crappy aces. I mean, the aces that I highlighted in the slides here, like aces, Jack 10 double suited, no matter what the stack depth is, you can always put in a bunch of money pre-flop because you do have such good coverage on such a wide range of boards. Once you start to get into these rainbow aces, it's just going to, the majority of boards are two-tone, so you're going to be fighting an uphill battle since you're never going to flop a flush draw.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. We got a couple minutes left here. Carlos wants to know, what bankroll do I need to start playing Omaha?
So I think that's, again, like not a totally straightforward answer. It depends on your willingness to reload. If you have some side income, I think that actually, what most people, in terms of bankroll, what most people ask, the question they're really asking, they're really asking two questions. The first question they're sort of indirectly asking is, how fast can I run a big bankroll without like going bust and having to invest more money? Or in other words, like, what's the minimum I can invest to get the most? And that question isn't like totally easy. I think if you're a beginning player, you should sort of prepare yourself to lose a couple buy-ins. I just think it's unrealistic to think that you're going to hop in and crush. I've seen that very, very rarely. It's a nice fantasy, but I'm not sure that happens for a very large majority of people. I think that the more important question that people should ask is not how fast they can move up, but how easily they can move down. That should actually be how you judge which stake you start at. So I'll give you a good example. Well, I'll give you two examples. One is if you're playing professionally and your livelihood depends on your ability to like grind and play a stake that doesn't affect your livelihood. That's a lot different than, you're kind of a hobbyist and you play here and there and you want to just basically feel like you win when you play. Then I think that you can start at like, 25 cent, 50 cent, 50 cent dollar online, and certainly 1-2 or 2-5 at the casino. Because, you're not like, this isn't like your last $1,000 on the planet. You're willing to reload and stuff like that. But if it is, it's like when I described you, when I had 20K, a 20K bankroll, like that was literally my bankroll. If I busted that, I was just completely, I was screwed. So I was way overrolled for the games I was playing. I think at the time I was only playing 1-2. Sometimes I would shot take and play like 3-6. So I would say as a it depends if you're playing online. If you're playing online, you can start with $100, but if you're playing live, I would plan to start with $1,000.
Okay. Tell you what, there's 2 more questions in the chat window. Let's go ahead and we'll take these last 2 questions and then we'll stop there. Got a question here from Debbie. She says, what do you think about PLO 8 high-low?
Love it. Great game. I hated it at first, but now I love it.
Do you find a lot of games with you find games with that at card rooms?
All the time. What's more common actually is Big O. You don't see a lot of like 4-card PLO 8 games, but you do see, especially during the series, you see a ton of Big O.
Yeah,
I love it though. I mean, the thing about Big O is if you're playing a bunch of good players, it's a really crappy game. But if you're playing in a really high action game, it's a lot of fun. And people are pretty bad at it. It's funny. I played in this is going to make me sound like a degenerate, but that's okay. I learned to play Big O. I had never played a single hand of high-low in my life. And then I got invited to this pretty big game. It's a private game. And the blinds were 5,100, if you can imagine. And I didn't even know what a low was. I had only played PLO and Hold'em. So here I am buying in for 5 to 10K in this Big O game. And I literally am texting my friend, like, what are good hands? I think I was Googling what is a good hand in Big O or like PLO 8. Like I didn't even know.
Wow.
So it was an interesting way to learn. But I actually ended up being pretty good at it. It's total like being thrown to the wolves kind of thing, where it's sink or swim. But it was fun.
Yeah, I've heard from people. I have some people in Southern California who say Big O is huge out there right now. That you find a lot more Big O than you'll find 4-card PLO at all nowadays. So, yeah,
I mean, it probably depends a little on the stake. I don't think that could be true for low stakes, but I do know that 5-card and Big O are like definitely gaining a lot of popularity.
Yeah, and in fact, Debbie is just saying in the chat window that there's great games out here in LA, and I assume she's probably talking about Big O when she says that. So, all right, last question here. A question from Juan. He says, does your online course present a strategy that we can learn and implement?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I don't think it's a good course for someone who has no prior knowledge of PLO, but if you've got some hands under your belt and certainly if you're already, you've had some success playing no limit, or you've played a lot of no limit and you're looking to transition, I think this is an excellent starting point.
All right. So on that note, once again, the link to purchase John's Win 1K course is right there at the top of the chat window, and that offer is available now. I'll also be sending out an email with a link to a replay of this webinar, and I'll be sure to include that link in the email as well. Someone asked in the chat window, does APT have plans to add PLO to the site? Maybe in the very long term, but we've got some things in the works, but I don't want to make any promises. It's going to be a while till that'll all be ready. But Debbie says, thanks, this was really good. Thank you all for coming out, and especially thanks to John for giving this webinar for us and giving us all an intro to PLO. John, do you have anything you want to close with?
No, I'm thrilled to be here. Again, thanks, Steve, for the opportunity to chat PLO with you guys tonight. Feel free to message me with any questions you have about anything PLO related. Seriously, like I have people emailing me all the time, just asking me questions, and I love it. So if you want to get in touch with me, John, JOHN, at PLOquickpro.com.
All right. Thank you all for coming out, and all of you that are members of Advanced Poker Training. Obviously, I appreciate your membership as the founder and someone that's been working on that site for nearly 10 years now. So, all right. Thank you, John, for your time, and we'll end the webinar here, and everyone have a good night.
Thank you, guys. Good luck.